The next panel, Now We're Cooking, Removing Barriers for Multifamily Electrification, is led by LAist Senior Reporter for Climate and Environment, Erin Stone. Panelists include Iris Alcantara, Director of Asset Management at Esperanza Community Housing, Armen Saiyan, Manager of Efficiency Solutions Engineering, Distributed Energy at LADWP, Weldon Kennedy, Co-Founder and CMO at Copper, and Mayte Sanchez, Acting Head of Market Transformation and Senior Energy Director at LACI.
All right, good afternoon. I think we're at afternoon now. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Erin Stone, LAist Climate and Environment Reporter, and you just heard all the intros, but we'll just say it again. This is Iris Alcantara, Director of Asset Management, Esperanza Community Housing. Armen Saiyan, Manager of Efficiency Solutions Engineering at LADWP, and Mayte Sanchez with LACI, and Weldon Kennedy, co-founder and CMO of Copper, which created the world's first battery-equipped induction range. So we're going to start, Mayte, with you. So LACI, has done. I've had the pleasure of covering some of the pilot projects that you guys have done, where you test technology and the scalability. So tell us a little bit of background about the particular induction stove project we're talking about today, and what you learned, what some of the biggest accomplishments and challenges were.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. A pleasure to be with everyone. So for this pilot, I had been tracking Copper actually for some time, and was really impressed with the product. But this specific pilot, we weren't actually approaching it as technology first. What we did was reach out to community organizations and asked if there's any way that LACI could support them with their needs, either from the clean energy end or transportation electrification side. And Esperanza reached out and confirmed that they could use support, and specifically, they were going to start being on the forefront of retrofitting their buildings for their residents. And at that point, there were a number of programs that were beginning to get stood up locally, statewide, but it was essentially on you. So we ended up taking some time to figure out what actually were the gaps that we could potentially support with. And then it quickly became very clear. Esperanza mentioned that one of their buildings that had 33 units, where they were looking to install induction stoves for the residents to get off of their gas stoves, that it would require approximately $800,000 just to do the electrical wiring and panel upgrades for the building. And that was essentially a barrier, a very concrete barrier. And that's when we had a discussion around and said, hey, there's actually this stove out there that is commercially available, that we could support with, that would avoid those upgrades. So it would not only be a benefit in terms of the costs, but also in terms of the tenant disruption. When we ended up deploying the Copper stoves, it was pretty seamless, I will say. I think we ended up calling it like our smoothest pilot installation that we've had to date. And that was because we just had to arrange the stoves being delivered. Once they were delivered in their units, they literally were just plugged in. So there was nothing else that went about it. So I will say, I think, I would love to hear from Iris, but I think that was definitely one of the biggest successes. I think when we talk about this transition, we minimize the experience at the individual level, and we tend to talk about, our goals and ambition. But when we think about the actual of retrofitting buildings, so getting off of gas appliance and gas technologies, we should consider, what does that mean for the individual? How many times do you have to knock on their door to figure out how many times they're coming in and out of their buildings? Most of us here probably have the luxury of arranging contractors pretty easily, doing things around that. But a lot of other individuals have to think about everything else, getting kids to school, going to work, et cetera. So the most we could minimize that tenant side is really, really critical. And then I will say, and I can speak about it more, but the biggest challenge was actually one that I did not expect, but now knowing everything that I know I should have expected, but it was Wi-Fi connectivity. So as part of the pilot, we wanted to ensure that Esperanza's residents had their stoves connected to the Wi-Fi so that from Copper's end, they could do any software reboots and support, provide good assistance, virtual assistance if they did need it. So we ended up installing Wi-Fi. The building itself is out in South Central LA, and that area is pretty saturated with connectivity. So where we actually installed the Wi-Fi didn't actually send the proper signals to all of the stoves. So we had to do some reconfiguration, and that took a lot of time just to figure out, and back to that earlier point around the coordination. But thankfully, I can now say that they're all hooked to the Wi-Fi. It was like a goal of mine that we would do it essentially ahead of the summit, so happy to report that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, you don't usually think Wi-Fi and stove go together, but in this day, this is where we are. That's interesting. Yeah, so in Iris, I mean, tell us a little bit more about why Esperanza was interested in building and electrifying some buildings, because usually building owners aren't very interested in that because of those upfront costs. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so, you know, we're a nonprofit where, you know, we have affordable housing units. And so, you know, we obviously were able to decarbonize these properties and, you know, the specific property by the support of LACI and the different sources, funding sources, more like the California Low-Income Weatherization Program, LADWP, LADWP's CAMR program, and so Tech, Clean California, and then Mayte. And so we were able to combine these programs. We combined them, and we were able to, of course, electrify via Esperanza. And so with this, we realized that, you know, with the funding and all of the different air issues that we discovered in the units, we realized that, okay, changing out gas wall heaters, changing out water heaters, changing out the gas stoves would make a significant impact in our tenants' well-being. So we, you know, we're a nonprofit, as I mentioned. We focus on obviously healthy breathing. We have a ton of programs on healthy breathing, and so it just naturally fit into our mission. And so this was something that we realized this is an opportunity for us to partner with LACI and all these different entities and be able to find a way to be able to do this because, you know, as a nonprofit, affordable housing, your resources, your financial resources are limited. So we are working, we're grateful that we have these different entities that can support us and support this mission.
Yeah, and before we move to the next question, tell us a little bit more about those air quality concerns that you guys found in the housing.
Yeah, so it's just, I wrote this down because I figured I'm not gonna remember this, but when we actually partnered with Stanford University, and we had them test 10 units with the existing gas stoves. And then we had them test another couple of days after we installed the new induction stoves. And the results were remarkable. We realized that, I think I was, you know, as I was walking into this conference, I was talking to somebody and I mentioned to them, I feel like all of this, you know, the air quality, there's been a lot of studies, there's been a lot of talk about it, and you know, about gas stoves versus induction stoves and whatnot, and you know, and so we hear about it, we know about it, but I said this when we conducted these tests, these air monitoring tests, it felt different, it hit different because we have relationships with our tenants because, you know, we some of these residents are older, they're disabled, and so we have relationships with them. They've lived in our apartment buildings for over 20 years, 25 years, and so through the years, we've seen their children grow. We have relationships with them. So when we realized how impactful it was, so just to mention, sorry, I wrote it down here because I wanted to share that with you. So we realized that during the cooking, nitrogen dioxide, or NO2, concentrations were on average 88% lower with induction cooking compared to gas. and then the carbon monoxide concentrations were 68% lower. In other words, simply replacing the gas stoves with induction stoves dramatically reduced the residents' exposure to harmful combustion pollutants.
Yeah, and we'll dig into that more a little bit later. But Weldon, I want to get to you and hear a little bit about what makes these stoves different and what you learned through this pilot about actually scaling this technology.
Yeah, thanks. So what makes this stove, the stoves that were installed at Esperanza, we call them Charlie. So Charlie's our flagship model. It's a battery-equipped induction range. So normally when you're putting in an induction range, it's going to be on a 240-volt line on a 50-amp breaker to be able to provide enough power for a high-powered cooking experience, to preheat the oven quickly, boil water quickly. That's a lot of power, right? The units at Esperanza, each unit is a 60-amp subpanel, right? And so you're functionally getting close to doubling the electrical capacity requirements of that building if you're going to put in induction stoves the traditional way. So why Charlie is different is it has a battery on board, a lithium iron phosphate battery, and that battery allows you to just plug into a normal wall outlet, the outlet that was behind the old gas stove, the one that was doing the oven light and those little tick-tick igniters, right? So that same power can then charge up the battery, and the battery provides a boost of power to preheat the oven very quickly, to boil water very quickly, all those things that require quickly dispensing power. The battery provides for that power and then can gently charge up when power is clean and cheap and abundant because the sun is shining, right? So you end up with a kind of better cooking experience because you actually get a faster preheat because you can get more power out of the battery than you could get out of that normal 50 amp 240-volt line. So you get more powerful cooking experience. You get this installation that is, Mayte referenced this. We are now averaging 6 threshold crossings at our multifamily installations, and so we want to get it to 2 threshold crossings. That's just the 2 people who bring it in, and that's the only time you have to cross thresholds. So you get a much easier, faster installation because of that simple plug-and-play installation, and then because you're avoiding all that rewiring work, sub-panel upgrades for every unit, upgrading the load center of the building, punching holes in all of the walls, having tenants potentially displaced overnight in some cases. You avoid all that work, you end up being dramatically cheaper as well. So that's how the Charlie range works and how it ends up being this high-performance machine that ends up saving you money.
Got it. So it's highly efficient. It's easier to install. Tell us about, what are the challenges and opportunities you learned about in terms of actually scaling this to more households?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think one of the biggest challenges is cooking is one of our most deeply held cultural practices. What food we prepare and how we prepare it is a deep cultural behavior for all of us. And every community where we're installing these stoves have different cooking practices. And so, especially in every community where we install, you see different cooking behaviors, and making sure that we're helping people understand how to translate their cultural traditions onto a new technology is a profound responsibility. And we have invested a lot in it, and the answer is you still need to invest more, right? Because it is a big change for folks. And so we saw that a lot at Esperanza. We brought in a local chef to kind of teach some, here's how you sear differently when you don't have open flame. Here's how the cooking behavior performs, what you should expect it to look like. And need to keep doing that because you don't get everyone with one event. You're one training is never enough. And so need to keep doing that, I think, is a valuable lesson. Going beyond Esperanza, if I can talk broadly in terms of things that we've seen that's really important to do, is lining up these activities around other electrification efforts. Actually, the stoves end up often being last because other electrification has typically been more incentivized, right? There are big incentives because there's bigger emissions, right? So the camera program, it's very great, right? It's a great program. Kudos to LADWP on that. It's really focused around emissions reduction is kind of how the incentive is structured. And stoves don't actually emit that much, right? They're their total emissions isn't that much. It just happens to be that where they emit it is in your home. And so it's poisoning you, which is bad. But it ends up being the stoves are last, and so people will have these these expectations of what electrification is like, and they'll come to it with it's inconvenient, giant installation process. It's a big headache that raises bills that because you can see bill increases as you switch, and none of those are true for our product and for the experience that we provide people. But we've not so much at Esperanza, but other multifamily properties we've gone to that have already done some of their other different programs where they've gotten heat pumps or water heaters. We've seen significant tenant resistance where they say, look, we've done this electrification thing. Higher bills and contractors poking around the walls for days. This is not a fun process. Like, come on, guys. And so ideally, hopefully we get to a point where stoves first. And we get people to this point where you're like, okay, actually, it can be easy, it can be joyful, it's a great outcome, and it doesn't have a meaningful bill impact. And so, I'd say that is a challenge that hopefully we can kind of keep getting ahead of that a bit more.
I will say, actually, just following up on that, to give full credit to Iris and her team, we're starting to see a little bit of that, some resistance, and similar to what you said, we were coming in after the fact. So even though the stove itself, it doesn't have a high impact on your bill traditionally, residents were then associating it with other what they perceive to be bill increases, a longer story. But Iris and her team got out in front of that and did a lot of outreach, education, and nurtured those relationships. And then that allowed us to continue it. But to Weldon's point, I think, this is our second induction stove pilot that we've done at LACI. And both times, I think the big learning has been we need to have probably at least 3 different educational touch points that are like substantive. So that's just something to note.
Iris, did you want to add to that?
I would add to that you're right. There was a lot of tenant engagement. I think that was really key. And I think it was also helpful to get everybody that was part of the project involved. So we said, Weldon, we need your team to come out. And they also sent some chefs over. And we had LACI, who was part of this as well. They were involved. LADWP was involved. And so I think, getting everybody involved really, really helped. And it just helped the tenants, just help them understand that, yes, there's a change. And it's not as scary, right? Because a lot of them, they resisted because they felt like, oh, well, my food is not going to taste the same. Or, how am I going to cook my tortillas, or, it's just not going to be the same. And so we had to do a lot of education and just really making them feel comfortable, making them feel like they're supported in this transition was key as well. So.
Yeah, great. Yeah, sounds like a big learning curve with this kind of technology. And when it is such an intimate space, a space that we use often, it's a tough one. So Armen, I want to get to you and tell us a little bit about LADWP's involvement with this process and kind of what you guys are seeing, what your strategies are, kind of bigger picture to support this kind of mass electrification across the city.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. One thing I'd like to say, so for electrification, LADWP is extremely supportive of electrification, mainly because of maintaining affordability. This is one core principle that we try to retain is making sure that we have affordable rates for customers, right? So electrification helps with basically getting more kilowatt hours and spreading that fixed cost of service across more kilowatt hours. So that's effectively how we do that. A lot of that is going to come from the transportation electrification side. We're looking at building electrification too. We're supporting that as well, but a lot of it is from that side on EV charging and whatnot. But we are trying to support everything across the board and understanding the challenges and this, hearing a lot of the challenges of implementation. I do want to emphasize retrofits are very difficult. They're cumbersome, they're intrusive at times, and we're, in terms of our organization for distributed energy solutions, we try to find customer solutions, and I think the biggest strength that we have is having diversity in the kinds of solutions that we have to offer. And that's one particular hallmark for the camera program. We're meant to be comprehensive, so we bring everything to the table. Energy efficiency, electrification offerings, we're looking at solar as well. And so trying to put all of this together and package it for the customers in such a way that we end up with something that ends up being an affordable project, right? And camera is targeted. We're looking at affordable housing. So we want to make sure at the end of the day, the tenants are the ones benefiting, and their bills end up being lower, right? So.
And Armen, can you specify what cameras is for folks that
Right,
don't
so
know?
CAMR stands for Comprehensive Affordable Multifamily Retrofits. It's a very long-winded term, but it's very appropriate because we try to make it, affordable for all. And it's a good model, actually. We've been looking at that as a model in terms of offering that diversity to other customer segments as well, and ultimately with the goal of making sure that we keep it affordable at the end of the day. So want to make sure that they end up with lower utility bills. And so whatever is beneficial for the customer first, that's what we look for, but also if it's beneficial for the utility, those are things that we could basically leverage as incentives and basically proliferate more of that at the end of the day.
Yeah, I want to.
Can we
yeah, go
just
ahead.
celebrate CAMR for a moment? So we sell across the country. We sell stoves all across the U.S. CAMR is, I think, the best affordable multifamily renovation incentive anywhere in the country. And I think LADWP probably doesn't get enough credit for it, but deserves being celebrated for that.
What makes it
incentive.
the best?
The scale of the incentive and the amount of support. So it's not just money. There's a kind of amount of consultative support in helping buildings make it happen. And then also its stability and predictability. We just saw in California earlier this year, a great incentive, the California Energy Smart Home incentives, with just no notice, zero notice. People have been planning projects for months and months, just disappear. The incentive was just gone. People got an email, and projects that you invested tens of thousands of dollars in planning were just gone. CAMR's consistency, its predictability, and you're able to plan around it, and then the support they provide and the amount of funding they provide, it's the best in the country. It's really, it's a class act.
So thank you for that, Weldon. And actually, I want to say we're not going to stop there. So effectively, we're always looking for new solutions, new technologies that would help the customers. So energy management systems is another part of it. Battery systems is another one. So we're looking at every solution that's possibly there and make sure that it's feasible. We find ways to navigate through all the different implementation challenges that we go through, right? And if there's something that we could incentivize, we definitely look at that opportunity. We've been speaking to Weldon's team about, okay, you got batteries now in place, good for outages, but could we make use of that, right? Is there any use for flexing some of those loads and making that a grid asset as well? So those are opportunities we're always looking at and always welcome more. So thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, let's talk about the kind of elephant in the room, which is affordability, right? We're all seeing the electric rates go up. Your gut reaction to let's electrify the whole building, have one big bill, that's scary, right? That's really scary, especially for low-income households. So talk to me about, we'll kind of go down the line here. What are the benefits financially for folks, and what are the challenges to making this truly affordable for people?
Okay. I have to say that, so we have to remember that as we think about energy changes, right? It's important that people don't experience a change through policy, right? It's when they actually get the bill, right? So it has to be affordable. We have to keep that in mind. And so affordability has to be part of the conversation. And then I know, I wrote down a couple of points here because I feel this is kind of from our perspective. So we have to continue, right, to prioritize investments in low-income and mission-based communities where residents often face the greatest health and energy burdens. Second, I think we have to expand accessibility, whole building retrofit incentives, layering multiple funding sources made our project possible. But the process was complex. So we have to remember that streamlining these programs would help many more affordable housing providers electrify their buildings. And the third point that I want to share with you is we have to ensure that there is a meaningful utility bill assistance for low and moderate income households so that residents can benefit from the electrification without facing higher monthly energy costs. And then finally, as we continue to invest in our electric grid, we need to do it in ways that improve reliability while keeping electricity as affordable as possible.
Thank you. All right, Armen, let's hear from you.
All right, I'll kind of reiterate. So we've been very sensitive to customer billing impacts whenever we make any type of offering. And the approach we've taken is try to bundle it, make it into a better package altogether so the end result ends up being beneficial for customers. But we do realize there's more to do, right? As costs do increase over time, we're always looking for new opportunities. And like I said, strength and diversity, right? So energy efficiency is key, lowering those loads. So, but we want to basically support electrifying as well, adding those loads, right? So that, luckily, it ends up being balancing out where it's not detrimental in terms of grid impacts. So that's one effective benefit there. And one thing, when we do offer electrification incentives, we're looking to basically mitigate those negative demand impacts, right? So we make sure it's an efficient option that they are pushed forward, right? Or our offerings are efficient. And finally, it's an all of the above solutions, right? So we integrate, load flexibility, on-site generation, and once we have all of those offerings in place, it really does make it affordable for the customers. There's a lot of work that takes place, so we are looking at every option that's available, and key thing there is that initial cost, right? If there's ways that we could expand, make it at scale. There's some economies of scale over there that we could take advantage of. So those are all things that we're looking at and trying to find that right balancing act, right, in terms of what level of investments we're making, what level of customer benefits we're getting, and ultimately affecting affordability at the end of the day.
Yeah, so Armen, so I'm hearing the upfront cost, having some kind of program that helps with that, as well as once it's installed, having that flexible load where it's like you're getting the energy at the cheapest time and kind of assisting with that, as well as bill assistance programs. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So we're working very closely with our distributed energy resources folks, our demand response folks. And effectively, a lot of our offerings, a lot of the electrification offerings that are out there are going to be demand response capable. Right? So now it provides more features that the customers could take advantage of down the road. So beyond that first initial cost that we have an offering for, there's some residual incentives with demand response, participation, and whatnot they could take advantage of. So over the whole life cycle, it does make it much more affordable. And we give them all kinds of options, right? That's, again, diversity is the strength of it all. So the more we have out there, more options that are available, we could start catering to specific customer segments and making sure we deliver the right things for them.
Yeah. And Mayte, from your perspective at LACI, what are kind of the main strategies you see to make this the most affordable and equitable transition possible?
I will say, like, all the things that Armen listed and Iris are like plus one to it. It is comprehensive. One thing that I do want to note specifically in this space that I do think we need to get better at, and that's part of the work that DWP is doing, is there's been a lot of instability in terms of market signals in the home electrification space. There's been programs set up, for various reasons. The incentives have gone away, then new programs get stood up. So it's really difficult then when someone like Copper is approaching customers and saying, hey, you have access to these incentives, because 1 minute they're there or 1 minute they're not. As we've talked about electrifying our homes and getting off of gas, one of the key solutions to making that more affordable is solar, and specifically rooftop solar. And that's something, for instance, that Esperanza was looking at. They need a new roof. That requires more upfront, financing. There should be an alternative where instead of then, getting that roof fixed up, or maybe they're not able to, you can tap into, for instance, community solar, so that you could actually benefit from the solar itself. But even on the solar side, the program development around community solar has not been great. Rooftop solar, NEM in the future, and there is a lot of disruption. So I think stability, as well as incentives that support this space so that we can actually make this transition happen, is really, really critical when we're thinking about that. So that's one area where LACI is really looking to lean in, at the utility level, but also statewide level, so that in the future, to Armen's point, you can actually also leverage the assets, so that we're not just putting these assets, but then not being able to utilize them from a grid side. So, going back to like what we heard yesterday around what's called virtual power plants. How do we actually leverage so that we ourselves are powering the grid and can can think about it from a local level.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Mayte. Yeah, Weldon, let's hear from you.
Okay. Look, the energy transition is expensive, and that cost is distributed among a bunch of people, right? There are choices that affect all of us, right? Like, we like to do interaction with the audience. Can I ask you guys? Like, who here still owns a fossil fuel burning machine? Like, a show of hands, you own a fossil fuel burning machine? Keep your hand up if part of the reason you haven't replaced it is because the cost of replacing it. Oh, hey, it's the reason, right? Like,
Or you're a renter.
Yeah, or you're a renter, right? Like, you own those devices as a renter? You know, like, anyway, so there's a tricky thing there, though, right? That, like, this is a room full of people who care about this, and it's still, like, the cost is still a barrier. So, like, that's a thing, right? And I think we should know that, own it, and just keep working on it. We've got to hammer on it every day, and we all, like, as advocates and people working in this space, need to take that action. We need to be proactive in addressing those costs ourselves and going after it. The second thing I would say on cost, right? So gas stoves, I'm glad IRC brought up the air quality research. Gas stoves cause 13% of childhood asthma cases in the state of California. A case of childhood asthma costs the California taxpayer $16,000 per year in treatment, right? And so it seems like a pretty straightforward thing. If you have a stove in the house, you should replace it. And even better, does it actually work? Well, so last week, researchers at Metro Health in Cincinnati did this. They'd been doing this study for a while, and they just published their findings last week. So they prescribed, a doctor there started just prescribing induction stoves and replacing gas stoves. And they did 72 homes of people with mild to severe asthma. And so their ACQ scores, that's the asthma control index that you use, improved by 1.1, which this is an arbitrary number. No one knows what their ACQ score is, right? So I will say most asthma treatment medications have an impact of 0.4 to 0.6. So to say that another way, getting rid of your gas stove is twice as impactful as existing medical treatments for asthma, to treat asthma. So at $16,000 per childhood asthma case, can we afford not to do this? Like, when you look at affordability, just the status quo costs that we are continuously paying and people are suffering through go invisible. They're like, we forget about them because they just come out of our bills. They come out of our tax bill on a regular basis, and so they're invisible. But like, honestly, we're paying more. The status quo is more expensive than change. In this case, we just don't see it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Weldon. Yeah, those are some statistics I'm going to be thinking about and researching after this. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. So yeah, I mean, I guess really quick, I mean, we're running out of time here, but Iris, I would love to hear just kind of like the initial response you've heard from tenants about this program, to kind of just land us in reality and kind of what they experienced. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so most of the feedback that we've gotten from our residents is positive. It's been great. They, aside from the health benefits, right, that we've shared with them, and they're saying that it's easier to clean, right? They're enjoying that it's not as complicated to clean, so they're enjoying that. They're also saying that their spaces aren't as hot as they used to be. And so
who else hates cooking in the summer?
I know, right? And so, a lot of our units are smaller, so that's a big deal, right? It gets really hot in there. So, and frankly, they're really enjoying it. They're enjoying the benefits. It's just we've just gotten like really positive feedback, and so they're really happy that we did this for them.
Yeah, and then Armen, just really quick, and then we'll do the last question. But I did want to hear a little bit more about the combination of programs. I mean, we know solar plus storage could really assist with something like this, as well as the grid. Are there any particular programs that really you guys are excited about that can help kind of push this transition forward with that affordability piece? Or is that something you're still really actively working out?
So there is a great expansion of our distributed energy resource program. So our DR program is expanding massively. So we're including more than just thermostats, right? So that's been primarily where we've been working at. So now it's looking at all kinds of other things that are flexible loads that we could work with. So there's a massive expansion on that area. We have programs for storage, right? And more of it is on a larger scale, but we are looking at different options that might be more on the customer side of things as well. So the program you might have mentioned is feed-in tariff. That usually requires a much larger installation. That might not be suitable for every type of installation. But we also have a virtual net metering program. So this was something that we've tied into a lot of the offerings that we have for Camera, which would also end up being benefiting to the tenants as well. So we're excited about all of them, actually. And really integrating, I think, is the other next stage to this, because we have worked in silos in the past, trying to find the opportunities to integrate a lot of it. I think a lot of success story here might be in the thermostats, where in terms of energy efficiency programs, we helped deploy a lot of it out in the field, and demand response was able to take advantage of all of it, right? So we wanted to look into more of these opportunities and see where we could integrate a lot of that and make sure that the customer, is automatically signed up to demand response once they get that new piece of equipment, right? And things of that nature, we're looking at all kinds of those opportunities as well.
Got it. So we're out of time, but just the last final, real quick down the line question. How will you commit to action on the road to 2028? Maybe we start with Weldon and come this way.
Sure. We will spend as much time as possible in Olympics are a cultural moment, and we will aid with the cultural transition of the energy transition, spend as much time as possible helping communities get excited about making the transition to using clean, renewable energy to improve their lives.
I'll mention my next thing that I'm doing after this summit, which is focusing on ways to improve standardized heat pump permitting. We're talking to the county, Edison, soon I'm sure LADWP, to figure out ways that we can support it to make it easier for residents.
On our part, we're constantly on the lookout for new technologies, new offerings that we could have to customers. So open to everything and all things, but also making it easier and more accessible for customers to be able to transition into that. So we're looking at all of it, especially on the education side of things as well. So that's another area we're starting to get more into, and then the engagement piece as well, making sure that customers, communities are far more engaged and aware of all these offerings that we have for them.
Yeah, and for Esperanza, our commitment begins and ends with our tenants, and so their health, their wellness, their safety, and their quality of life is highly important to us. So we're going to continue to electrify our portfolios, as complicated as they may be, but we will continue to get through the barriers that way.
Thank you all so much for sharing your insight. Let's give them a round of applause.